Don't touch me. It's disgusting. June in New York City. The air was thick and syrupy, a sweetness you couldn't sweat out. My name is Julian Croft, and I was 3 months into my probationary period in the risk management department at Stellaris Capital. Today was my final review. It was also the first time I'd ever been this close to hell. The conference room was chilled like a Siberian winter, the Arctic air blasting the back of my neck. At the head of the long table sat Scarlett Thorne. She was the head of risk management at Stellaris, a woman whose name, like her presence, was sharp and vividly crimson. She wore a flawlessly tailored black suit, her only accessory a simple Patek Philippe on her wrist. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, revealing a smooth, high forehead and the cold, elegant line of her neck. At this moment, she was staring at the PowerPoint presentation on the screen before me with eyes that could appraise a man like a non-performing asset. Julian, her voice wasn't loud, but it pierced my eardrums like an ice pick. This is what you have to show for 3 months? A jumble of publicly available data you scraped off the internet to piece together this self-satisfied market analysis. A fine sweat broke out on my forehead. I'd spent 2 weeks on this, barely sleeping. No, Ms. Thorne, behind the data. Behind the data is what? She cut me off, leaning forward slightly. The pressure in the room amplified tenfold. Your naive logical deductions, or your complete ignorance of what risk actually is. She stood up, her 7-centimeter heels clicking on the polished floor as she walked toward me. A cold, arresting fragrance enveloped me, a blend of wood smoke and some unidentifiable flower. It wasn't a sweet, feminine perfume. It was more like a single red bloom in a pine forest after a blizzard. She picked up the hard copy of my report from the table. After flipping through just 2 pages, she dropped it with a slap. The papers scattered like a startled flock of doves. Your risk rating for Apex Properties is AB+, with a recommendation for additional investment. Her fingertip, tipped with a blood-red nail, tapped the report's title. Your reasoning is that they secured the new Southgate development plot, implying a hidden endorsement from the city? Yes, based on my interpretation of the zoning policies. Your interpretation? She let out a soft laugh, devoid of any warmth. Are you aware that the majority shareholder of Apex lost $300 million in Vegas last week? Are you aware that the capital they used to acquire that land was a short-term bridge loan from an overseas shell company with an interest rate of 30%? And are you aware that your so-called city endorsement was nothing more than a photo op the chairman had with a retired city official at a fundraiser? My mind went blank. None of that information was publicly available. With every point she made, she took another step closer. Finally, she stopped right in front of me, so close I could see her flawless skin and the reflection of my own pale, pathetic face in her pupils. She bent down and picked up one of the scattered pages. But instead of handing it to me, she held it between 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. Don't waste my time with your naivety. She turned and tossed the paper squarely into the wastebasket next to my feet. Your probationary review is denied. HR will speak with you on Monday. The room was deathly silent. My colleagues stared at their notes, not daring to look at me, and certainly not at her. I clenched my fists, my nails digging deep into my palms. Humiliation washed over me like a tidal wave. Ms. Thorne, I heard my own voice, raw and hoarse, but unervingly clear. Give me another chance. She paused at the door, her back to me. I have no use for armchair analysts who are all talk. 1 week, I said, staring at her silhouette. Give me 1 week, and I'll deliver a due diligence report that will satisfy you. If I can't, I'll walk out that door myself. The air felt solid. After a long moment, I heard her exhale, a sound like a quiet scoff. Fine, but remember this, she said, glancing back over her shoulder, the corner of her eye as sharp as a razor's edge. Don't ever let me see trash like this again. She left. The sound of her heels striking the floor was like a hammer on my dignity. The cold fragrance she wore still lingered, but the room was already buzzing with whispers. I could feel their pity, their mockery, their schadenfreude. I ignored them. I just bent down, reached into the wastebasket, and retrieved the report she had discarded. The edge of the paper was still cold from her touch, hard and unforgiving. I walked out of the conference room and went straight to the records room. The files on Apex Properties stacked up to my waist. I had to find the secrets she knew and the loopholes she hadn't mentioned, buried in this mountain of paper. I refused to believe she was omniscient. Information was warfare. She had her network. I would build mine. For the next 3 days, the records room was my home. When I was tired, I'd nap on a stack of files. When I was hungry, I'd choke down a piece of bread. I combed through every financial statement, partnership agreement, lawsuit, and media mention on Apex from the last 5 years, using different colored pens to map out potential connections and cash flows. On the fourth day, just before dawn, I found a name, an insignificant name on a list of Apex's suppliers, Transcontinental Logistics. Their business with Apex was minor, but every year there was a sizable consulting fee. I followed that thread. The owner of Transcontinental was the Apex chairman's brother-in-law. And Transcontinental's largest overseas expenditure was a payment to an investment firm in the Cayman Islands. That was the shell company Scarlett had mentioned. Once I had the lead, all that was left was verification. I started making calls, pulling strings, even paying for information from gray market sources. Friday evening. The building was empty except for the lights on my floor. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows with a cup of instant coffee, looking down at the city's river of traffic. My phone vibrated. It was a message from a friend in risk management at a bank. Julian, got what you needed. That Cayman company had a $300 million transaction recently. The recipient was a VIP account at a Vegas casino. Juicy enough for you? I read the text and let out a long breath. For the first time, the bitter taste of the coffee felt invigorating. I had won. At the very least, I had earned a seat back at the table. I turned from the window, ready to head back to my desk and compile the final report. As I turned, I collided with something soft yet unyielding. The coffee in my hand sloshed out, the scalding liquid splashing across an expensive silk blouse. I stumbled back, my head snapping up to meet Scarlett Thorne's bottomless eyes. She was still here. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Thorne." I fumbled for some tissues, trying to dab at the stain on her shirt. The moment my hand got near her, she grabbed my wrist. Her hand was cold, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't touch me." Her voice was even colder than it had been in the conference room, laced with an undisguised revulsion. "It's disgusting." Her perfume was a soul-stealing poison. Her hand was a cold, iron clamp around my wrist. That familiar fragrance, the one like a pine forest after a blizzard, was now laced with a biting chill and the bitter, burnt smell of coffee. I opened my mouth, but my throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. She let go as if she'd touched something unclean, pulling a handkerchief from her pocket to methodically wipe her fingers. It was dark gray silk, embroidered with a family crest I didn't recognize. Her gaze fell to the phone in my hand. The screen was still lit, the message about the Vegas casino account clearly visible. Her eyes flickered, but it was too fast to be sure. "Working late?" she asked, her tone flat and unreadable. "Yes, preparing the supplementary report on Apex." I tried to keep my voice steady. She said nothing more. She walked past me to her office, unlocked the door with a fingerprint scanner, and it clicked open. She didn't go in right away. Instead, she looked back at me. "Come in." I hesitated. Late at night, on an empty floor, alone in her office with this woman. Every part of that screamed danger. "Bring your findings," she added, already stepping inside. I had no choice. I grabbed my laptop and followed her in. Her office was enormous, occupying the best corner of the floor. A massive window offered a panoramic view of half the New York City skyline. The decor was minimalist and cold, black, white, and gray, just like her. Precise, restrained, with no excess emotion. The cold fragrance was stronger in here. I finally saw its source. On her desk was a chic, minimalist brass censer, a thin wisp of smoke curling from it. So this was where the scent came from. It wasn't perfume. It was something older, more invasive. "Talk," she said. She sat in a large executive chair that looked more like a throne, crossing her legs with an air of elegant detachment. I opened my laptop and laid out everything I'd found over the past few days, from Transcontinental Logistics to the Cayman Islands Shell Company, and finally, the $300 million gambling debt. I didn't mention my friend's help, claiming I had deduced it all from logical inconsistencies in the public data. Rule number 1 in the corporate world: never show your hand. She listened in silence, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. In the quiet office, the sound was like a stopwatch counting down my life. When I finished, a long silence filled the room. I could hear my own heart pounding against my ribs. "The logic is sound. You have supporting data, and your conclusions are reasonable," she finally said, offering a neutral assessment. I breathed a small sigh of relief. However, her tone shifted. "You're still a rookie." My heart leaped back into my throat. "All you've done is prove that you aren't useless, but merely a competent analyst." She looked at me, her gaze sharp. "But the gap between an analyst and a decision-maker is a chasm. You only saw the risk. You didn't see the opportunity behind it." She stood and walked to the window, her back to me. "The chairman of Apex is a gambler, yes. But gamblers are often the boldest. The fact that he was willing to take on high-interest debt to secure that land means he has absolute confidence in the Southgate project. Now his capital chain is broken, which is precisely our opportunity. Her voice echoed in the spacious office, carrying a kind of clairvoyant power. We won't offer additional investment. We'll pivot to an equity acquisition. We can leverage his desperation to secure a controlling interest in the entire Southgate project for a relatively low price. He owes the casino money. He's more desperate than we are. In this negotiation, we have the absolute upper hand. I was stunned. I had spent a week killing myself just to catch up to her, to see the landmine she had spotted from the beginning. And she was already on the other side of it, figuring out how to turn the minefield into her personal garden. That was the chasm between us. Rewrite your report based on this approach, she said, turning back to face me. Have it on my desk by 9 a.m. Monday. And one more thing, she added, her gaze falling on my shirt, wrinkled from days of sleepless work. Pay attention to your appearance. Stellaris has no need for employees who look like refugees. It was an order wrapped in undisguised contempt. I nodded, closed my laptop, and prepared to leave. Wait, she stopped me, walking over to a cabinet and taking out a first aid kit. She came back, grabbed my hand without warning, and turned it over. I hadn't even noticed that I'd broken the skin on my palm, leaving several deep, crusted marks where my nails had dug in. Her fingers were cool as they lightly touched the wounds, sending a faint shiver through me. She took out a cotton swab and antiseptic, her eyes lowered, silently and intently cleaning my palm. Her movements were gentle, professional, a stark contrast to the ruthless corporate predator I knew. The only sound in the office was the soft scrape of cotton on skin. That cold fragrance surrounded me again, but this time it felt less aggressive, tinged with something disorienting. I looked at her lowered eyelashes, long and thick like tiny fans, hiding whatever emotion lay in her eyes. I noticed for the first time that the line of her profile was actually soft, if not for the perpetually stern expression she wore. Why? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Why what? She asked without looking up. Why? Are you doing this? Her hand paused for a fraction of a second. Then she looked up at me, the corner of her mouth curling into a ghost of smile. My possessions, even the trash I'm about to throw away, must be kept in perfect condition until the moment of disposal. After she finished, she carefully applied a Band-Aid to my palm, let go of my hand, and tossed the used swabs into the trash. The brief moment of tenderness vanished, as if it had never happened. Now you can go, she said, her powerful director persona firmly back in place. I walked out her office, my heart still racing. Back at my empty desk, I looked at the neatly applied Band-Aid on my palm. And then I understood. Scarlett wasn't being kind. She was taming me, like a wild animal she had just captured. First, you break its spirit with absolute authority. Then, you offer an unexpected moment of grace to confuse it, to make it forget how to fight back. And that cold, domineering fragrance that permeated everything, that was the boundary of her territory. Once you stepped inside, there was no easy way out. It was a warning, a brand, and a soul-stealing poison. I sat in my chair and didn't sleep all night. Her words echoed in my head, and I could feel the faint sting from the wound on my palm. I knew she had me in her sights. Tonight, your Mind Monday morning, 8:59 a.m., I placed a completely new report, titled Feasibility Study for Equity Acquisition of Apex Properties, on her desk. It was restructured entirely according to her strategy. The language was precise, the logic airtight. I had even included several different scenarios for the negotiation tactics. She picked it up and read it line by line. I stood before her desk like a prisoner awaiting sentencing. 10 minutes later, she closed the report. Acceptable was all she said, but from the fleeting glimmer of approval in her eyes, I knew I had won my bet. As of today, your position is permanent, she said, looking at me. Additionally, I'm submitting a request to HR to make you my provisional assistant for the duration of the Apex project. My heart jolted. Being her assistant meant I would have more exposure to the firm's core business, a golden opportunity for a rookie. But it also meant I would be completely under her control, on call 24/7. It was a gift and it was a leash. What, you're not interested? She asked, raising an eyebrow. No, it would be my honor, I said, lowering my head to hide the complex emotions in my eyes. Then get to work. She waved a dismissive hand, as if shooing away a dog. The following month was a masterclass in what a demonic work ethic looked like. Scarlett's standards were pathologically demanding. A single punctuation error in a document would get you dragged over the coals with the most scathing criticism imaginable. I became the department's special case. Everyone knew I was handpicked by Director Thorne, but they could also see that she tormented me more than anyone else. I had no personal life. I was the first to arrive at the office and the last to leave. If she called, no matter what I was doing, I had to be in front of her within 15 minutes. Gradually, I started to learn her habits. She only drank pour-over Yirgacheffe coffee, black. She was a mild germaphobe. Files had to be arranged in a specific order. She hated men who wore strong cologne and people who talked too much. I became a high-precision radar, carefully navigating her minefields, striving to become the most efficient tool for her to wield. One night, an urgent overseas merger kept the entire project team working late. By the time the meeting ended, it was nearly 1 a.m. Outside, without warning, a torrential downpour began. Fat raindrops hammered against the windows, sounding like they wanted to swallow the world whole. "How are we supposed to get home in this?" my colleagues fretted. "Guess we'll call an Uber. It's gonna be a long wait." Scarlett gathered her things, glanced at the storm outside, and frowned. "Julian," she called to me. "Did you drive?" I did, I nodded. I had just used my first month's salary to buy a beat-up Ford Focus to make the late nights easier. "Drive me home." 2 words delivered as a command. Unquestionable. "Of course, Ms. Thorne." Under the ambiguous and envious stares of my colleagues, I took my keys and walked into the elevator with her. We were alone in the enclosed space. Her cold fragrance, mixed with the damp air of the rainy night, was especially sharp. "Where do you live?" I asked. She gave me an address. I froze for a second. It was in the most exclusive residential area in the city, a building called the Pinnacle on Central Park South, where apartments sold for 9 figures. My car, parked in a place like that, would look like a rickshaw at the entrance of the Four Seasons. When we got to the underground garage, I clicked my car key. A dusty, gray Ford Focus in the corner blinked its lights. Scarlett glanced at the car, then back at me. The corner of her mouth twitched, a look that was part sarcasm, part something else. She said nothing, just pulled open the passenger door and got in. The car pulled out of the garage and into the curtain of rain. The windshield wipers swiped frantically, but couldn't keep up with the deluge. The car was silent. I focused on driving while she leaned back against the passenger seat, her eyes closed, seemingly asleep. Stripped of her daytime armor, she looked less formidable and more exhausted. Her long eyelashes cast small shadows on her cheeks, and her lips were pale. I felt a sudden sense of dislocation. The office door this woman, who commanded storms at the office and terrified everyone, was sitting quietly beside me in a space smaller than a closet, breathing the same air. The car reached the entrance of the Pinnacle and was stopped by security. "Ma'am, which residence are you?" the guard asked through the window, his tone reverent as he looked at Scarlett. Scarlett opened her eyes, rolled down the window, and swept her cool gaze over him. The guard immediately fell silent and waved us through. That was the scent of power. I followed her directions and pulled up in front of a massive, standalone penthouse entrance. The architecture was strikingly modern, brilliantly lit against the rainy night like a silent, anchored ship. "We're here, Ms. Thorne," I said, putting the car in park. She made no move to get out. She turned her head and looked at me, her eyes dark and deep in the dim light of the car. "Come in. Have a glass of water before you go." "No, it's too late. I said come in," she repeated, her voice firm. The rain was coming down even harder, with no sign of stopping. I looked at her non-negotiable expression and knew I had no choice. I followed her out of the car and into the penthouse. The interior design was identical to her office. Vast expanses of black, white, and gray. It was spacious, cold, and felt utterly devoid of human warmth. "Wait here." She slipped off her heels and walked barefoot up the stairs. I stood awkwardly in the foyer, dripping wet, feeling like my very presence was a stain on this immaculate home. Soon, she came back downstairs. She had changed into a black silk robe, her damp hair falling loosely around her shoulders, her face free of makeup. She was a world away from the fully armored director I knew from the office. In her hand was a dry towel. "Dry yourself off," she said, handing it to me. I took it and roughly dried my hair and face. She just stood there watching me, her gaze unwavering, as if admiring a newly acquired trophy. "Julian," she said suddenly, "are you afraid of me?" I froze. "You're my superior. I have a great deal of respect for you," I said, choosing my words carefully. She smiled. It was the first time I had ever seen her truly smile. Not a smirk, not a sneer. The corners of her mouth turned up, her eyes filled with a shattered, star-like light. It was a dangerously beautiful sight. "Respect?" She repeated the word, then stepped toward me. I instinctively backed away until my back hit the cold wall. There was nowhere left to go. She reached out, her cool fingertips tracing the line of my throat. I could feel my Adam's apple bob, my heart hammering against my ribs. I like the look in your eyes, she whispered, her voice a murmur against my ear. Like a cornered wolf cub, scared to death, but still too proud to bow your head. Her other hand came up to cup my face. Her palm was soft and cool. At the office, I'm your director. Her body pressed against mine. Through the thin fabric of my shirt, I could feel the curve of her body, the coolness of her skin. That cold fragrance completely consumed me. But tonight, her lips brushed against my ear, her warm breath sending a shiver through my entire body. You're mine? The hunter and the prey after that night. Everything changed. And yet, nothing changed at all. At the office, Scarlett was still the untouchable, unassailable Director Thorne. In fact, she became even stricter with me. She would mark up my reports with dense forests of red ink. She would cut me off mid-sentence during presentations to point out a logical flaw. Once, for a minuscule error in a data point, she tore me to shreds in front of the entire department. If everyone at Stellaris were as careless as you, the company would be bankrupt in 3 months. Her cold words were like a whip, flaming raw. My colleagues looked at me with a mixture of pity and a certain smug satisfaction. They were probably all thinking that the new guy Director Thorne had once favored had finally fallen from grace. No one knew that just the night before, in the vast, empty bedroom of her Pinnacle penthouse, this same woman had traced the lines of my face with an almost obsessive gaze and whispered hoarsely in my ear, "Julian, you're the only one who makes me feel alive." We existed in a strange equilibrium. The office door was a barrier, separating two entirely different worlds. Outside that door, she was my god, the master of my career, the controller of my fate. I had to be utterly deferential, call her Ms. Thorne, and endure all her exacting demands. Inside that door, we were the most intimate strangers in the city. She would shed all her armor, revealing an almost pathological possessiveness and a fragile dependency. She would order me, in the most imperious tone, hold me, and on certain sleepless nights, she would curl up beside me like a child, her brow furrowed in some nightmarish struggle. I had become her drug. This double life was both thrilling and crushing. I started getting used to seeing a row of new shirts and suits, all in my size, in her walk-in closet. She never asked for my measurements, but every single item was a perfect fit. I started getting used to the black Aston Martin parked next to my car. It was one of hers, and sometimes, on a whim, she'd have me drive that ridiculously out-of-place luxury car to take her to work. And I started getting used to the way, after a moment of intimacy, she would put her cold mask back on, look me over, and ask, "Are the materials for tomorrow morning's meeting ready?" She never spoke of feelings. The word love never passed between us. Our relationship was more like an unspoken contract. She gave me opportunities, resources, a platform it would take a normal person a decade to reach. In return, I gave her my time, my body, and a piece of my soul. One day, I came down with a bad cold and was running a low fever, but I still dragged myself to work. I was in the break room mixing a cold remedy when a few female colleagues came in. They saw me and exchanged a knowing glance. One of them, Vivi, a notorious gossip, walked over with a smile, her voice just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Julian, you've been working so hard lately, haven't you? Look at you, you've lost weight. Director Thorne has high expectations for you, so you'd better keep performing well." She emphasized the words, high expectations. Another colleague chimed in, "Yeah, we're all so jealous." Getting to receive Director Thorne's personal guidance. The words dripped with acidic insinuation. I ignored them and turned to leave with my mug. "Hey, Julian," Vivi called after me. "That scent you're wearing. It's quite distinctive. It smells just like the aromatherapy diffuser in Ms. Thorne's office, doesn't it?" My back went rigid. I had forgotten. Scarlett's domineering, cold fragrance had left its indelible mark on me. Day and night in her presence had saturated my clothes, my skin, even my breath with her scent. I didn't look back, just walked quickly to my desk. As I sat down, I could feel countless eyes on my back, sharp as needles. I opened my laptop, but couldn't read a single word. Vivi's comment was a stone dropped into a placid lake, sending out ripples I had been trying so hard to ignore. Could our relationship really remain a secret? That afternoon, Scarlett returned from a meeting and passed by my desk. "In my office," she said, her expression unreadable. I followed her in and closed the door. She didn't sit behind her desk. Instead, she walked right up to me, leaned in close to my neck, and took a soft sniff. My body tensed instantly. "You were too close to other people today," she said, her voice low and laced with a barely perceptible thread of danger. My heart sank. She knew. With her eyes and ears all over the company, a little gossip in the break room would never escape her. I don't like it," she interrupted, her finger tracing the collar of my shirt, the one that carried her scent. When my things pick up the smell of others. In that moment, I felt less like a person and more like an object she had branded as private property. From now on, she said, lifting her eyes to meet mine, stay away from those women. Their heads are filled with nothing but gossip and jealousy. Her gaze was one of absolute possession, her tone a command that permitted no argument. I looked at her and suddenly felt like I couldn't breathe. Could the office door really separate two worlds? Or was it that, from the moment I stepped into her world, I no longer had one of my own? Inside or out, I was always under her control. That night, back at the penthouse, she seemed to be in a bad mood, sitting alone at the bar, drinking red wine. I walked up behind her and tentatively wrapped my arms around her waist. Her body stiffened for a second, but didn't push me away. About today. I'm sorry, I said softly. She didn't answer, just tilted her head back and drained the wine from her glass. Then she turned around, cupped my face in her hands, and kissed me. A knife in the dark, that kiss was different from all the others. It wasn't about desire or seduction. It was a desperate, frantic act of possession, as if she wanted to consume me whole, to meld me into her very bones. I could taste the rich wine on her tongue and a faint, underlying bitterness. After a long time, she finally pulled away, her forehead resting against mine as she gasped for breath. "Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "promise me you'll never leave me." It was the first time I'd ever heard anything close to a plea in her voice. I looked into her eyes and saw a depth of vulnerability and fear I had never seen before. My heart, for some reason, softened. "I won't," I said. I didn't know if the promise was to soothe her or to hypnotize myself. After getting my promise, Scarlett seemed to relax a little. But it was the relaxation of a predator that has just confirmed ownership of its prey. Her control didn't lessen. Instead, it became more subtle, more pervasive, seeping into every corner of my life. She gave me a new phone, ostensibly for work, but its GPS was active 24 hours a day. She would suggest what color I should wear because it suits you better. She would even inquire about my social life, casually asking which friend I'd had dinner with and what we talked about. I was a bird in a golden cage. The cage was beautiful, the food and water were plentiful, and I could even see the sky outside. But my every feather, every song, was under the watchful eye of my keeper. The Apex project was a resounding success. Under Scarlett's direction, we acquired a 30% stake in the company for a rock-bottom, friendly price, becoming their largest shareholder. My performance on the project earned me a formal appointment as director's assistant. At a company-wide meeting, Scarlett praised me generously. Although Julian is young, he is innovative and driven, a rare talent. The room erupted in applause. I stood beside her, accepting the congratulations and envious looks from everyone. In that moment, my vanity swelled. I almost believed we were partners, the most in-sync duo in the corporate world. That night, however, back at the penthouse, I was taking a shower when she walked into the bathroom. The steamy mirror reflected her figure, clad in her black silk robe. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching me in silence. "Enjoying the limelight at the meeting today?" she asked, her tone unreadable. I turned off the water and started drying my hair, not answering. "Those people," she said, walking toward me. She reached out and poked my chest with her finger. "Those men who envy you, those women who are jealous of you, do you know what they're thinking?" Her fingertip was like ice, sliding over my warm, damp skin. "They're wondering how you really got ahead. Was it talent or—" Her finger slid lower, stopping at a dangerous spot. "Something else." My body went rigid. "Ms. Thorne, we agreed that at the office." She pressed a finger to my lips, stopping me. "There is no Ms. Thorne here." She looked up, her eyes meeting mine with a cruel smile. "They're right, you know. Your talent, I gave it to you. Your position, I bestowed it upon you. Julian, everything you are is because of me." Her words were a poison knife, twisting precisely in my most vulnerable spot. All my hard work, all my sleepless nights, all my effort, she dismissed it all as a mere gift from her. So, she cupped my face, forcing me to look at her. "You'll be a good boy, because I can give you everything, which means I can also take it all away." At that moment, something inside me snapped. I grabbed her wrist and slammed her against the wall. She seemed surprised by my resistance, a flicker of shock in her eyes. "Scarlett." It was the first time I had ever used her first name. My voice trembled with rage. "What do you think I am? Some pet you can reward and discard whenever you please. I am a person. I have my own dignity." She looked at me, the shock in her eyes slowly morphing into something more complex. Excitement, appreciation, and a trace of offended fury. Dignity, she laughed, a wild edge to it. Can dignity get you a foothold at Stellaris? Can it get you into the pinnacle? Can it get you behind the wheel of an Aston Martin? Julian, don't be so naive. Between you and me, it was never a relationship of equals. She broke free of my grip, turning the tables, grabbing the collar of my robe, and pulling me toward her. You are my prey, she breathed, her scent, wine, and that inherent coldness, washing over my face. From the moment I first saw you, your fate was sealed. The defiance and ambition in your eyes. It's so much like I was back then. I just don't want to see you make the same mistakes I did. I'm giving you a shortcut. Isn't that a good thing? I stared at her face, so close to mine. That exquisitely beautiful face was now a mask of obsession and madness. A wave of helplessness washed over me. We weren't even having the same conversation. She operated on her own logic. Powerful, self-contained, and utterly intolerant of any challenge. In her world, everything she did for me was a gift. She took me under her wing, cleared my path, and shielded me from the storm. All I had to do in return was offer my loyalty. It seemed fair on the surface, but it stripped me of the two things I valued most: the right to choose and the right to be respected as a human being. Let me go, I said, closing my eyes, my voice weary. She didn't move. I said, let me go. I repeated, my tone harder. This time, she released me. I didn't look at her again. I turned, walked out of the bathroom, went to the guest room, and locked the door. It was the first time I had ever refused her, the first time I had ever locked myself away from her. I knew it was a declaration of war. That night, I sat in the darkness, listening. At first, there was silence from outside the door. Then, I heard the sound of her pacing, growing more and more agitated. She walked back and forth like a caged beast. Finally, the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I could feel her presence, just on the other side of the wood. She didn't knock. She didn't speak. We remained there, separated by a single door, locked in a silent standoff. I don't know how long passed before I heard her walk away. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, followed immediately by a strange, inexplicable pang of disappointment. I finally drifted off to a restless sleep as dawn approached. The next morning, I went downstairs with dark circles under my eyes. She was already dressed impeccably, sitting at the dining table, eating breakfast with her usual elegance, as if last night had been nothing but a dream. She saw me and glanced up, her expression placid. Hurry up and eat. We can't be late. Her tone was normal, betraying no emotion. But I knew something had changed. That unresolved fight was an invisible thorn between us. She was the hunter. So what did that make me? Was I really content to be nothing more than her caged prey? Taking out the trash after that fight, Scarlett and I entered a strange Cold War. At the office, she became even more demanding, her scrutiny bordering on sadistic. The smallest flaw would be magnified and criticized with the sharpest possible language in front of everyone. The department's perception of me shifted from envy to pity and speculation. Rumors that I had fallen from favor began to circulate in the break room and on the company's internal forums. At the penthouse, our interactions dropped to absolute zero. We stayed in our separate rooms, rarely even crossing paths. She stopped coming to my room, and I tacitly stayed out of her bedroom. The intense intimacy we'd shared felt like a distant memory. I thought she would quickly tire of this game and discard me like an old toy. I even braced myself to be demoted or fired. But she didn't. She just kept up the Cold War, a blunt knife slowly wearing down my resolve. I'll admit I wavered. A few times, after she had publicly eviscerated another piece of my work, I came close to slapping my resignation on her desk. But at the last second, her words would come back to me. Your talent, I gave it to you. Your position, I bestowed it upon you. I refused to accept that. I couldn't just walk away in disgrace and prove her right. I had to show her, and myself, that Julian Croft could succeed without her. I started working with a new ferocity. I no longer just completed the tasks she assigned me. I actively sought out new projects, built my own network, and developed my own channels of information. I had to make her see that I wasn't her accessory, but a partner who could meet her as an equal. Just as my relationship with Scarlett hit this stalemate, I felt a new undercurrent in the office. It came from the company's other vice president, Leo Vance. Leo was a company veteran, head of the investment division, which had always had a relationship with risk management that was equal parts cooperation and competition. He was slick, hid his ambition behind a friendly smile, and had deep roots in the company. Before, we had coexisted peacefully. But recently, I noticed a different kind of interest in his eyes when he looked at me. One day, we were alone in the elevator. Julian, he said, clapping me on the shoulder with practiced affability. How's work been treating you? Director Thorne has high hopes for you, you know. It's going well. Thank you for asking, Mr. Vance, I replied politely. It's good for a young man to be driven, he said, his tone shifting. But you also have to know when to be flexible. Some trees provide a lot of shade, but if you stand too close, they can block out your own light. His words were loaded. I just smiled and didn't respond. I'm looking at a new energy project over here. Very promising, he continued. I saw your report on Apex. Excellent work. Any interest in coming over to my team to lend a hand? He was trying to poach me, and he was doing it right under Scarlett's nose. A cold knot of apprehension formed in my stomach. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Vance. But Director Thorne has been very good to me, and I have no plans to leave my current position, I said, politely deflecting. He wasn't fazed, his smile never wavering. No problem. A young man should always keep his options open. My door is always open for you. The elevator doors opened. He gave me one last meaningful smile and walked out. I watched him go, a chill running down my spine. I didn't tell Scarlett about it. In our current state, she would either think I was trying to use another man to provoke her, or worse, that I was genuinely considering jumping ship. But I started paying attention to Leo's movements. I noticed that Vivi, the colleague who had tested me about the fragrance in the break room, had been getting very friendly with Leo's assistant. A bad feeling started to grow. Sure enough, a few days later, trouble found me. A small project I was managing was in the final bidding stage when our proposal and bottom line price were perfectly undercut by a competitor. They came in just 0.1% lower than us, and their proposal's core highlights were almost identical to ours. We lost the project. The financial loss to the company was minimal, but the reputational damage was significant. It was clearly an inside job, and all fingers pointed to me. As the project lead, all key documents had passed through my hands. Scarlett summoned me to her office. This time, she didn't yell. She just sat there, watching me, her eyes colder than I had ever seen them. Julian, do you have anything to say? I was set up, I said, looking her straight in the eye. Someone has been targeting me ever since I took over this project. Evidence. I don't have direct proof. But if you don't have proof, then don't waste my time with excuses, she cut me off. The company doesn't need excuses. It needs results. You will take full responsibility for this failure. I will submit a report to the board recommending a formal reprimand be placed on your record. A formal reprimand. For a newly confirmed employee, it was a career-killing stain. Any chance of future promotion would be next to impossible. I don't accept that, I said, my fists clenched. Give me 3 days. I'll find the mole. She looked at me, a complex emotion flickering in her eyes. And if you can't? If I can't, I took a deep breath. I will not only accept the reprimand, but I will also resign immediately and get the hell out of Stellaris. She was silent. The familiar cold fragrance in her office seemed to take on a deadly edge. I knew someone was in the shadows, knife sharpened, waiting for me to make a mistake. And that someone was very likely Leo Vance. He wanted to use me to strike at Scarlett, but Scarlett's own reaction was impossible to read. Was she testing me? Or was she genuinely so disappointed that she was ready to cut her losses and sacrifice a pawn? Or perhaps, like me, she was just another piece in this game, unable to control her own fate. Fine, she finally said after a long pause. I'll give you 3 days. She hesitated for a moment, then added, don't disappoint me. I tore up your resignation. I only had 3 days. This couldn't be investigated through normal company channels. An internal inquiry would just tip them off, and with Leo's influence, he could sever the evidence trail in 100 different ways. I had to do this my way. My first thought was Vivi. The woman was like a hyena with a keen sense of smell, always showing up in the right place at the wrong time. Her comment about the fragrance, her recent closeness with Leo's assistant, it all made her the prime suspect. But I couldn't confront her directly. I needed leverage. I called my friend, the one who helped me with the Vegas casino information. This time, I asked him to pull Vivi's bank and credit card statements for the last 6 months. My friend was efficient. The next afternoon, a detailed spreadsheet landed in my inbox. I spotted the anomaly immediately. Last month, Vivi had a $20,000 charge on her credit card for a limited edition Hermes bag. Her salary couldn't possibly support that kind of luxury purchase. More importantly, the day after the purchase, an anonymous transfer of exactly $20,000 appeared in her bank account. Looking at the transfer record, I was almost certain it was her payment for selling out the company. Now I just needed to get her to talk. The opportunity came quickly. Friday night was a company team-building event at a high-end karaoke bar. As a director, Scarlett made an appearance, had a drink with a few senior managers, and left early. After she was gone, the atmosphere immediately loosened up. Leo Vance, glass in hand, floated between rooms with a triumphant air, clearly the star of the evening. I saw Vivi fluttering around him like a moth to a flame, smiling coquettishly and taking drinks for him. I kept quiet, nursing my drink and watching everything unfold. Halfway through the party, I excused myself to go to the restroom and slipped out. But I didn't go to the restroom. I went straight to the parking garage. I remembered Vivi drove a red Mini Cooper. It was easy to find. I didn't do anything to the car. I just took out my phone and sent a screenshot of her $20,000 credit card bill, along with the anonymous bank transfer, as an anonymous text message to her assistant. I knew that with Vivi's vanity, she would have bragged about the bag to her assistant. And assistants, in an office, are often the hubs of secret information. After sending the text, I slipped back into the party. Sure enough, less than half an hour later, I saw Vivi's assistant run in, her face pale. She leaned in and whispered frantically in Vivi's ear. Vivi's expression changed instantly. She glanced around the room. Her eyes met mine for a split second before darting away. She grabbed her purse and left in a hurry. The fish was on the hook. I was waiting for her at the entrance of the karaoke bar. When she saw me, she looked like she'd seen a ghost and tried to run. "Vivi," I called out, my voice quiet but firm enough to stop her. "Can we talk?" She turned, her face ashen, her eyes evasive. "I have nothing to talk to you about." "Really?" I held up my phone, the screenshot of the bank transfer visible on the screen. 20 grand for a purse and the confidential details of a project bid. Sounds like a pretty good deal. Her knees buckled, and she nearly collapsed. "No, it wasn't me. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "That's fine," I smiled. "You don't have to tell me. I've already forwarded this to the company's compliance department anonymously. I'm sure they'll have some professionals who would love to talk to you." That was the last straw. "Don't," she shrieked, grabbing my arm. "Please, Julian, let me go. It was all Leo. Leo Vance made me do it. He came to me, said if I could get him your proposal, he'd give me $20,000 and help me get a transfer to the investment division." It was a moment of weakness. I really didn't mean for any of this to happen. She was sobbing, her makeup running down her face in streaks. I looked at her without a shred of pity. "Tell me everything you know about Leo." "Everything," I said, taking out my phone and starting a voice recording, "including how he told you to get the proposal." Half an hour later, I left the karaoke bar with a 30-minute audio confession. On the way back, I sent Scarlett a text. "Ms. Thorne, I found the mole." She didn't reply. Monday morning, I arrived at the office half an hour early, as usual. To my surprise, Scarlett was already there. I walked into her office, ready to hand over the recording. She held up a hand to stop me. "It's been handled." On her desk was a printed document. She pushed it toward me. It was Vivi's resignation letter, along with a signed non-disclosure agreement. I was stunned. She submitted her resignation on Saturday night. Her exit was processed this morning, Scarlett said, her tone flat, as if discussing something trivial. "What about Leo Vance?" I asked. "Mr. Vance." Scarlett lifted her coffee cup, took a delicate sip, and a cold smile touched her lips. "A project he's managing recently ran into some minor issues and was publicly criticized by the board. He's a bit too preoccupied to bother with small-timers like us right now." My heart went cold. I looked at Scarlett. She was dressed in a white suit, her makeup flawless, looking no different than any other day. But there was something in her eyes that chilled me to the bone. It was the look of someone who had absolute control, who had played the entire game from above. My recording had been useless. In fact, everything I had done was probably exactly what she had expected. She already knew Vivi was the mole. She already knew Leo was the puppet master. Her giving me 3 days wasn't a test or an opportunity. She just wanted to watch a show. A show where the little wolf cub uses its own clumsy claws to tear at its enemies and prove its worth. And then, just before I could proudly present my evidence, she had already solved the problem in a way that was more efficient, more thorough, and left no trace. She hadn't even given me the chance to take credit. "Trash like Vivi," she said, putting down her coffee cup. She looked up at me and suddenly smiled. It was a smile just like the one she'd given me in the penthouse, right before she kissed me. Dangerous and utterly demonic. "I took care of it for you." She cried like a child. Scarlett's breezy declaration, "I took care of it for you," was like a bucket of ice water dumped over my head, chilling me to the core. So, what I had thought was my triumphant counterattack was, in her eyes, nothing more than a bit of after-dinner entertainment. The truth I had fought tooth and nail to uncover was just a hand she'd already known was in play. The sense of defeat and humiliation was even more intense than the first time she had shamed me in the conference room. Because this time, what I had lost was the last pathetic shred of my self-respect. I finally understood. As long as I stayed by her side, I could never be her equal. All my growth, all my struggles, were just a performance for her viewing pleasure, conducted within the confines of a stage she had built. I had to leave, not be discarded, not be fired, but to walk away on my own terms. The thought, once it formed, was impossible to suppress. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop, ignored my work, and created a new document. The title, Resignation Letter. I didn't bother with pleasantries or complaints about compensation. I wrote only one sentence. Due to personal reasons, I hereby resign from the position of director's assistant, effective immediately. Signed, Julian Croft. I printed the letter, signed it, and sealed it in a manila envelope. Then I stood up and walked, once again, toward the office that held my fate. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open and walked in. Scarlett was on the phone, speaking fluent, authoritative English with what sounded like an overseas branch. She frowned when she saw me, but continued her call, gesturing with her eyes for me to wait. I didn't wait. I walked to her desk and placed the resignation letter directly in front of her. Her phone conversation stopped mid-sentence. She looked at the envelope, then up at me. Her expression shifted from surprise to ice, finally settling into the stillness of a frozen lake. "Apologies, I'll call you back," she said curtly into the phone and hung up. The office was silent, charged with the tension of our standoff. "What is this?" she asked, her voice low. "My resignation. Reason. Personal." She laughed, a cold, sharp sound that was more rage than humor. "Julian, do you really think your wings have grown strong enough to play these kinds of games with me?" "This isn't a game." I met her gaze without flinching. "I'm resigning. As of today, I no longer want to be your assistant. And I no longer want to be your anything." I put heavy emphasis on the last word. The air solidified. She stared at me for a full 30 seconds, her gaze like a scalpel trying to dissect me. Then, she reached out and picked up the letter. I thought she would toss it in the trash, like before, but she didn't. Right in front of me, with an almost elegant grace, she tore the letter into tiny pieces. The shreds of paper drifted down like snowflakes onto her expensive ebony desk. "I tore up your resignation, Julian," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "I did not accept it." Blood rushed to my head. "What right do you have to not accept it?" I roared. "It's my right to resign. Do you own Stellaris?" "Stellaris is not mine," she said, slowly rising from her chair and walking toward me. "But in here, what I say goes. Do you think walking out that door will prove anything? That you're some noble, principled man?" She shot out her hand and grabbed my wrist, the same one that had been wounded before. "Let me tell you something. You walk out of here today, and within 3 days, not a single financial firm in this city will hire you. Do you believe me?" Her threat was naked, undisguised. A chill ran through me. I believed her. With her power and connections, blacklisting a nobody like me would be easier than crushing an ant. "What do you want from me?" My voice trembled with a mixture of rage and helplessness. "I don't want anything." Her other hand came up to my face, not in a caress, but with a cruel strength, forcing me to look at her. "I just want you to understand one thing. You are mine. In life, you are mine. And in death, you will be my ghost." Her eyes were filled with a terrifying, unprecedented madness. For the first time, I felt true fear in her presence. This woman was insane. "Never." I threw her hand off with all my strength. "Then let's find out," she said, the corner of her mouth curling into a bloodthirsty smirk. "Let's see what's stronger, your spine or my methods. Get out," she pointed to the door, "and don't let me see you again until you've learned how to listen." I was a cornered animal, my chest heaving. I knew there was no point in arguing further. I turned and slammed the door behind me. The sound echoed down the hall. The entire department stared at me in shock. I ignored them all, walked to my desk, grabbed my personal belongings, and left the building without a backward glance. I didn't go home. I just drove aimlessly through the streets of the city. Scarlett's face, her words, replayed in my mind like a nightmare. I thought I knew her. I thought I understood her strength, her control, her loneliness. Today, I realized I had only seen the tip of the iceberg, and beneath the surface lay a dark, obsessive soul I couldn't possibly comprehend. Night fell. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered. "Mr. Croft." It was a man's polite voice on the other end. "This is Ms. Thorne's butler. She's had too much to drink this evening, and her stomach condition is acting up. Would it be convenient for you to come over?" My turn to make the rules. The butler's voice was polite and distant, yet held a note of unmistakable urgency. My first thought was, this is her latest trick, a pity play to force me back into line. She has a personal physician and you to look after her. "It's not appropriate for me to be there," I said coldly. "Mr. Croft," the butler paused, sounding troubled. The thing is, she won't let the doctor near her. She's locked herself in her room ever since she got home and won't open the door for anyone. She keeps saying your name. My heart clenched. That woman, that eternally composed, seemingly invincible woman, would lock herself in her room like a wounded animal, pushing everyone away. I couldn't picture it. I'm on my way. After hanging up, I stared at the blur of city lights passing by my car window, my mind a chaotic mess. Logic told me not to go. This was my chance to make a clean break. But some other, deeper emotion was already turning the car around, heading for the pinnacle. I was just going to see for myself just how broken the unbreakable woman could be. The penthouse was brightly lit but eerily silent. The old butler was waiting for me at the door, his face a mask of relief. Mr. Croft, thank God you're here. Where is she? Upstairs in the master bedroom, he said, pointing. She locked herself in the moment she got back this afternoon. Hasn't eaten a thing. I heard things breaking. I frowned and took the stairs two at a time. The master bedroom door was shut tight. I stood before the door I'd passed through countless times, yet it now felt completely alien. I raised a hand and knocked. Scarlett, it's me. Julian. Open the door. No response. Scarlett, I said, my voice louder. If you don't open this door, I'm breaking it down. Still, only silence. I took 2 steps back, took a deep breath, and braced my shoulder to ram the door. Just then, with a soft click, the lock disengaged. The door opened a crack into pure darkness. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The overwhelming stench of alcohol, mixed with that familiar cold fragrance, hit me like a physical blow. The lights were off. The only illumination came from the pale moonlight spilling across the floor, revealing a scene of utter devastation. Expensive perfume bottles, delicate ornaments, shattered glasses. The once immaculate room looked like it had been ransacked. And there was Scarlett, curled up on the cold floor by the massive window. She was still wearing her power suit from earlier, but her hair was a mess and her makeup was smudged. She had her arms wrapped around her knees, her head buried, looking like a child abandoned by the entire world. Several empty whiskey bottles lay on the floor beside her. In that instant, my heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. Was this the same Scarlett I knew? Slowly, I walked toward her. The sound of my footsteps startled her. She snapped her head up. In the moonlight, her eyes were red-rimmed and raw. Those eyes, normally so full of cold calculation, were now filled with vulnerability, confusion, and a fear so deep it looked like despair. What are you doing here? Her voice was hoarse, thick with unshed tears. Come to laugh at me? Get up, I said. The floor is cold. I don't need you to tell me what to do, she snarled, like a cornered cat. Weren't you leaving? Then get out. Why did you come back? She grabbed a nearby throw pillow and hurled it at me. I didn't move. The pillow hit me with a soft thud and fell to the floor. I walked over to her and bent down, intending to pull her to her feet. The moment my hand touched her arm, she began to struggle wildly. Don't touch me. Get away from me. She hit and pushed, a small, frantic animal. Her blows were weak, but her panic was real. Afraid of hurting her, I pulled her into my arms, pinning her against my chest. Let me go. Julian, you bastard. Let me go. She screamed, struggling in my embrace, pounding her fists against my back. I didn't say a word. I just held her, letting her vent. Gradually, her struggles weakened. The pounding became listless pushes. Finally, she went still. I felt a warm dampness spreading on my shoulder. She was crying, silently, with choked, suppressed sobs. Her hot tears soaked through my shirt, scalding me. I held her, my body rigid, and all the time I'd known her, I'd seen her cold, I'd seen her powerful, I'd seen her possessive and cruel. But I had never, ever imagined she could cry, crying like a lost child who couldn't find her way home. After what felt like an eternity, her storm of emotions finally subsided. Julian, she mumbled against my chest. I'm here. Do you think I'm pathetic? I was quiet for a moment. A little. I felt her body stiffen in my arms. But what I really want to know is why, I said, looking down at the top of her head. Why did you become this way? She didn't answer right away. The room fell silent again, filled only with the sound of our breathing. When I was 11, she finally began, her voice a faint whisper, as if telling a story from a distant land. My father's company went bankrupt. Overnight, we went from heaven to hell. The debt collectors were at our door. The friends and relatives who used to fawn over us vanished. My mother, she couldn't take it. She jumped from the top of our building, right in front of me. My heart constricted. After that, I was sent to live with my uncle, my father's own brother. He said he would take care of me. Her voice began to tremble. And he took care of me, all right. He seized what little was left of my father's assets. Then, to secure an investment. He sent me to the bed of an investor who was in his 50s, old enough to be my grandfather. My arms tightened around her instinctively. I ran away, climbed out a hotel window, almost fell to my death. I was 13. I was alone, living on the streets. I slept under bridges, dug through trash for food. I was beaten, cursed at. I swore that one day I would crush every single person who had ever looked down on me, who had ever hurt me. Then I met my adoptive father. He took me in, gave me an education, taught me about business. He taught me how to survive in this dog-eat-dog world. The first thing he taught me was to never trust anyone, because the human heart is the most unreliable thing in the world. The second thing he taught me was to hold on tightly to everything you desire, because the only thing that's truly yours is what's in your grasp. She looked up, her red-rimmed eyes meeting mine in the darkness. Julian, I'm not trying to control you. I'm just afraid. I'm afraid of loss. I'm afraid of being left with nothing again. You are the only person in all these years who has made me feel like I could let my guard down just a little. So when I saw that resignation letter, she didn't finish, but I understood. Her dominance, her control, her obsession, all her inexplicable actions stemmed from a deep, cavernous fear that had never healed. She wasn't some all-powerful queen. She was just a desperately lonely person who had built a fortress of ice around herself, all while craving a flicker of warmth in the outside world. I looked at her, at that pale, beautiful face stained with tears. My anger, my resentment, it all evaporated in that moment. In its place was a fierce, overwhelming ache. I lowered my head and gently kissed the tears from her cheeks. Then I kissed her lips. Her scars, this kiss was different. It wasn't about testing boundaries or claiming possession. There was no lust. It had only one purpose, to soothe, like calming a wounded beast that had finally, tentatively, sheathed its claws. She didn't respond, but she didn't pull away. She just let me kiss her. I felt the tension slowly drain from her body as she softened in my arms. After a long moment, I broke the kiss. I scooped her up from the cold floor. She was impossibly light. I carried her to the bed and pulled the covers over her. I'll go make you something to eat, I said. She didn't speak, just watched me with those red, swollen eyes. It was the look of a child terrified of being abandoned again. I paused at the door and looked back at her. I'm not leaving. I closed the door and went downstairs. The kitchen was state-of-the-art, but looked like it had never been used. The refrigerator was empty except for a few bottles of expensive mineral water and champagne. This woman had no idea how to take care of herself. I had the butler go to a nearby 24-hour convenience store for some simple ingredients. Half an hour later, I walked back in her room with a bowl of hot, simple noodle broth with a poached egg and spinach. She had turned on the lights. The mess on the floor had been tidied away. She had changed into a clean robe and was leaning against the headboard, watching me quietly. I put the bowl on the nightstand. Eat. You haven't had anything all day. You'll destroy your stomach. She looked at the bowl but didn't move. I don't know how to use chopsticks, she said suddenly, her voice very small. I paused. Then I realized, of course, she'd had a Western upbringing and lived abroad for years. I picked up the chopsticks, lifted a small bundle of noodles, blew on them to cool them, and held them to her lips. Open up. She looked at me, her expression complex, but she obediently opened her mouth and took the bite. Just like that, I fed her the entire bowl, one mouthful at a time. When she was done, I got the first aid kit and tended to the cuts on her hands. She had sliced her knuckles on broken glass, leaving several thin, bloody lines. As I applied antiseptic, she was silent, just watching me. Scarlett, I said, applying a Band-Aid. We need to talk. Her body tensed slightly. About what? About how you're leaving me. No. I looked up and met her eyes. About how we're going to move forward from here. She looked at me, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Julian, let me finish. I pulled a chair to her bedside, so we were at eye level. I'm sorry for what you went through. I can't even imagine it. I understand your fear, and I understand your insecurity. But my tone shifted. That doesn't give you the right to hurt me. And it doesn't give you the right to completely control my life. The color drained from her face. I'm not your property, and I am not your pet. I am my own person. I have my own thoughts, my own dignity, and my own path to walk. I admit, you've given me a lot. Without you, I'd probably still be struggling at the bottom. I'm grateful for the opportunities, but I need our relationship to be one of equals, at least emotionally. I looked at her, spelling out my terms clearly. I can stay. I can continue to be by your side. I can even try to understand you, to protect you, to pull you out of that dark past. But you have to change for me. Starting today, I need you to promise me 3 things. She was silent, just watching me, waiting First, at work, you can be demanding, but you cannot be demeaning. I am your subordinate, but I am also your man. You need to show me basic respect. Second, in our life together, you can depend on me, but you cannot control me. My phone, my friends, what I wear, who I see, that is my freedom. You have to trust that I can handle myself without causing trouble for you. Third, I took a deep breath, delivering the most important point. We have to learn to communicate. If you're unhappy, if you're scared, if you have a problem, talk to me. No more Cold Wars. No more hurting each other to solve our problems. When I finished, a long silence filled the room. She looked at me, her expression a whirlwind of emotions. Shock, conflict, resentment, and a flicker of something I had never seen before. Confusion. I knew my demands were a direct challenge to the survival creed she had lived by for 20 years. To let down her guard and trust someone. To give up control and grant freedom. For her, it was harder than dying. What if? I can't? She finally asked, her voice raspy. Then we walk away. I answered without hesitation. I may not have a fancy background, Julian Croft, but I have a spine. I will not sacrifice my self-respect for anyone. I'll give you time to think about it. I stood up, preparing to leave. Wait, she called out. I turned back. Her face was a portrait of torment and vulnerability. Julian, she bit her lip, as if it took all her strength just to ask the question. If I try, will you really not leave? I looked at her, saw that last fragile flicker of hope in her eyes, a hope that was almost a plea. My heart melted completely. I walked back to her bed, leaned down, and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. I won't leave. But, Scarlett, I said, looking her in the eyes, my voice gentler but firmer than ever before. This time, it's my turn to make the rules. The devil's return, the new rules began to take shape between us, clumsily and cautiously. Scarlett was trying, really trying, to change. The next day at the office, she called me in and, right in front of me, fed the shredded pieces of my resignation letter into the paper shredder. Your position remains unchanged, she said. Her tone was still a bit stiff, but the oppressive, domineering air was gone. However, regarding the conditions you proposed yesterday, I will need to see your value. I knew what she meant. She could offer respect, but I had to earn it with commensurate ability. That was fair. I threw myself into my work with renewed vigor. I stopped thinking of myself as a mere assistant and started approaching problems from the perspective of a partner. I began proactively offering my own insights on projects, even gently pointing out minor flaws in her decisions during a few meetings. Before, she would have eviscerated me on the spot. Now, she would fall silent, consider my point, and twice, she even adopted my suggestions. It was a huge step forward. Everyone in the department noticed the shift in our dynamic. Director Thorne was still formidable, but with Julian, there was a new, undefinable leniency. In our personal life, the changes were even more pronounced. She disabled the location tracking on my work phone. She stopped commenting on my clothes or my social life. Though when I came home late after a night out with friends, she would still be waiting on the living room sofa, arms crossed, her expression sour enough to curdle milk. But she wouldn't interrogate me. She'd just throw a cold, "You're back," over her shoulder and head upstairs. I knew she was learning, in her own way, to let go. We started trying to communicate like a normal couple. We'd eat dinner together, though I still did most of the cooking. She would stand in the kitchen doorway and watch me, a sense of peace in her eyes that I don't think she even recognized in herself. We'd watch movies on the weekends. She would critique the logical fallacies in romantic comedies, and I would pass her the popcorn. Once, we were watching a scene where the hero was carrying the heroine on his back along a beach at sunset. She suddenly remarked, "That's idiotic." I smiled. "Want to try it?" She froze, a faint blush creeping up her neck. "Of course not. It's ridiculous," she said, trying to sound tough. But later that night, as we were leaving the theater and passing a park, she looked at me and mumbled, "My feet hurt." I smiled and crouched down in front of her. "Hop on, Ms. Thorne." She hesitated for a long time before finally climbing onto my back. I carried her under the dim yellow glow of the park lamps. Her body was soft against mine, carrying her familiar cold fragrance. She rested her head on my shoulder, and I could feel her warm breath. "Julian," she whispered by my ear. "Yeah. Thank you." It was the first time I had ever heard those words from her. I felt like I was slowly, carefully, making my way into her fortress of ice. The fortress was beginning to thaw, but the scars of the past don't disappear so easily. She still had nightmares. Nightmares of her mother falling, of being pushed into that old man's room by her uncle. Every time she woke up from one, she would be drenched in a cold sweat, her face ashen. And every time, I would hold her, gently stroking her back, and tell her, "It's okay. I'm here." I became the only person who could touch her wounds. One night, she woke up from another nightmare. I was comforting her, as usual, when she gripped my hand tightly. "Julian, take me to see him." "See who?" "My uncle," she said, her eyes filled with a deep-seated hatred. "He's out of prison." My heart stopped. I learned then that years ago, with the help of her adoptive father, her monstrous uncle had been sentenced to 10 years for embezzlement and fraud. The timing was about right. "What are you planning to do?" I asked, worried. "Nothing," she said, but her eyes were like poisoned ice. "I just want to see for myself how well he's doing." The next day, I took the day off and drove her to a dilapidated old neighborhood. We found her uncle at the bottom of a dark, damp tenement building. He had aged terribly. His hair was white, his back was stooped, and he was wearing a grease-stained undershirt, arguing with a street vendor over a few cents. He was a universe away from the well-dressed, respectable-looking businessman he had once been. Scarlett stood across the street, watching him coldly. Her hands are trembling slightly. The man seemed to notice our gaze and looked over. When he recognized Scarlett, he froze. His expression went from shock to fear, and finally, to a nauseating mix of greed and sycophancy. He ran toward us. "Scarlett, is that really you, Scarlett? My dear niece." I instinctively stepped in front of her. "Get lost," I said, my voice low and cold. "Hey, who are you?" he said, his eyes darting from me to the luxury car behind us, shining with avarice. "Scarlett, you made it big. You can't forget your uncle. Back then, if it weren't for me taking care of you, you wouldn't be where you are today." He actually had the gall to bring up back then. Scarlett's trembling intensified. I could feel the beast of hatred she had suppressed for so many years about to break free. I squeezed her hand. It was as cold as iron. "Scarlett," I said, meeting her eyes, "look at me. Remember our agreement. Don't turn into a monster for the sake of human garbage. You are a million times better than him now. That is the best revenge." My voice was like a stream of cool water, pulling her back from the brink of being consumed by hatred. She looked at me, and the madness in her eyes slowly receded, replaced by a glimmer of clarity. She took a deep breath, pulled a thick wad of cash from her purse, and threw it at the man's feet. "That's enough to buy you a decent coffin," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "Don't ever let me see you again. If you do, I can't guarantee you'll be left standing." With that, she took my hand, turned, and walked away without looking back. The man scrambled on the ground, snatching up the scattered bills, still shouting, "Thank you, my dear niece. Thank you." We got back in the car. Scarlett was silent, staring out the window as tears streamed down her face. I knew that today she had finally, personally, closed the book on her past. It was painful, but the deepest, ugliest scar was finally beginning to heal. I reached over and pulled her into my arms. "It's over." She leaned on my shoulder and nodded. I believed that from this day forward, she would slowly learn to make peace with her past, and I would be there with her every step of the way. But I had no idea that the real storm was just beginning to gather.